Hi everyone, Mario here with another Ruby tutorial. In this week's session, we're going to be recreating the classic game Pong using the Ruby 2D library. This tutorial will be split up into two different sessions just because of the sheer length of it. So in the first session, we're going to be getting the basic functionality of the game working. And then in the next tutorial, we're going to look at finishing it off, making it all really nice and polished. So let's have a look at the working game. This is what we're going to end up with at the end of this tutorial. So as you can see, it resembles a classic Pong game. There's a few things missing, obviously, from this one. There's no scoreboards, there's no audio, which would be cool, as well as the angles of the ball. The ball always comes off at the same angle, whereas it would be nice to have it change angle depending on where on the paddle you hit it. Those are all things that we'll look at in the next tutorial, but for the moment, let's get stuck in and have a look at some code to make this version. For the player, I'm going to create a player class, and that's where all the logic around the player paddle is going to go. So because we have an opponent which shares a lot of the same properties, so the opponent paddle will also move in the same way, we're probably going to use the same class to represent both of those things because there's only a few differences between the player and the opponent that we're playing. So I'm going to create a class paddle. We're going to set initialize. So when we start the paddle, we need to know what side it's on. So we're going to have side. And for the moment, we're only going to do the player. So we're going to say if side equals left, so from the left side, then we'll set the X position. So the player is going to be quite close to the left side. So let's say maybe 20 or 40 pixels all the way from the left. So we'll say X equals, let's say 20. Otherwise, the X will be 20 in from the right. So by default, our dimensions are 640 by 480. So the width of 640, we want our opponent to be, let's say 20 in. So it'll be 620. Okay, and now we're going to draw. And to draw it, we're just going to draw a rectangle. Okay, so rectangle.new. So the rectangle has the X value, so the X is going to be just whatever we've got set here for X. The Y value, so how far down do we want the paddle? I'd say just about halfway down. It's going to be around 200 or so, so halfway would be 320, but we're talking about the top of the rectangle, so 200 I think will be about there. We've got our width, so let's just set the width to be 20, I would say, and the height can be a bit more, so let's say about 80 for the height. We just need to pick a color. I think maybe let's go black. That might be cool against our green background. So now we've got our paddle class, we're going to create an instance of the paddle. So we're going to say player equals paddle.new, and the side of the player is going to be on the left side. And now we just need to call draw for every single frame. So let's do that. So on each update, we're going to say player.draw. Okay, let's see if we can get our paddle on the screen now. Okay, so that's looking good. I think I might make it a bit bigger. So I think here 80 is probably not tall enough. So I'd say, or we say maybe about double. And then I think maybe a little bit wider as well. I might also inset it a little bit more. That's 20 pixels. So let's maybe say 40 inwards. We'll double this height, and then we'll also make it a little bit wider. Maybe, I don't know, 25 or 30. Let's give that a go. So let's say the width is going to be 25. Here, we're going to say it's 40 from the left, and on the other side, we're going to mirror that. And then the height, let's try, let's say about 150. Okay, that looks a bit more like a Pong paddle. I'm not really liking this black. I might just change it to, let's say, white. I think the contrast might be better there. Okay, that's looking a bit better. So next thing to do is to move the paddle up and down when we press our keys. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to say on key down. So we've got one event that will happen on key down, and once you press key down, it's going to start the movement. Once you release the key, then it's going to stop the movement. So we also need key up. So key up is when you release that key. Okay, so we want to check what key we're getting. So if we use the arrow keys, we're going to get the strings. So event.key will either return the string up, down. So let's just put a condition here. So let's say if event.key is up. So if it's going up, then we'll say player dot, let's say set direction equals up. Otherwise, if the event.key is down, then we'll say player.set direction goes down. Okay, let's finish that. And so we just need to set, we need to create this method now on our player class. The player doesn't have a direction initially, so let's just set the direction to be nil. So that would indicate that it's not moving at all. I'll just change this a bit. Actually, let's just do this direction. Okay, so to be able to set this direction, we need an attribute writer, and then we also need a, actually we just need an attribute writer. So writer direction. Okay, and now the next thing to do is to change the player position. So when we draw, then we're going to move that player, that we're going to move the Y value based on what's kind of happening. So currently we don't track the Y value, we're just setting the value here. So we're going to need to do that as well. So we'll say Y equals 200. And then when we draw, we're going to just put the Y value on here. And now all we need to do now is each frame, before we draw, we're going to allow the player to move. So let's make the move method here. Now, if the paddle is going up, then we're going to change the Y value. And if it's going, we're going to add, if they're going up, sorry, we'll take away the Y value. And if they're going down, we will add Y value. So we'll say if direction is up, then we're going to say Y. So if we take 1 away from the Y, otherwise, if direction is down, then what we'll do is we'll add 1 to the Y. Okay, so let's see how we go with that. I haven't done the key up just yet. We'll get to that in just a moment. Okay, I'm going to press my key. So what's happening is it is working properly, but we're not actually clearing this screen at all. So what's happening is it's drawing the rectangle over itself each time. So here in the update, what we also want to do is you want to clear the screen just like this. So before we draw anything, we'll just clear each time. Okay, and that's a bit better. I've let go of the keyboard now, and you can see it's still moving. So the next thing to do is just get it to stop. We basically want to stop its movement as soon as you let go of the any key at all on the keyboard. So here on the key up, we can just say player.direction is nil. Okay, so I'm holding it, I've let go, it stopped. I'm holding it down, I've let go, it's stopped, so that's great. The one thing to change may be the speed of this paddle. It's quite slow. From memory, when you play the real Pong game, then it's a little bit quicker than this. So I'd say we might want to times, instead of using 1 pixel each time, we might want to change it to be, let's say about 5 or so. So let's try that. So what I will do is the other thing is we might want our opponent to move at a slower speed just based on the difficulty. So that might be something that we will set in our initializer, so we can set it for our player and also our opponent. So I'm going to take in another variable here, another argument, and we might call this movement speed. And we will just set this as a instance variable here so we can access it. And then here we're going to just plus equals movement speed, and so minus equals movement speed and plus equals movement speed. We just need to now pass this argument in down here where we're calling paddle new. So let's say 5. Okay, much better. So the next thing is it's clipping through the top or the bottom of the screen. We should have a stop where it can't move anymore. So if you've hit, if the top of it's at 0 or the bottom of it's all the way at the end of the screen, we want to stop that. The interesting to note is this X and this Y, what that's actually referring to is it's referring to the top left corner of this paddle. And so this height here is 480 pixels. So this is 480. But if I go all the way down to the bottom, the Y, the position of this isn't actually 480. It's 480 take the height. So to get to the top, it's very easy to check this because we can just say, is Y, less or equal to 0? That's fine. But here we actually have to say, is Y plus the height of the paddle more or equal to the bottom? And then we will stop it moving. So let's do that now. To limit the paddle from going through the top, we're going to use a neat trick in Ruby to make sure this doesn't go below 0. The way we're going to do it is we're going to put our number, so we're going to put what the new Y position would be in an array. So let's say our Y position would be 10. And then in the array, we'll put a second number, and the second number is going to be the minimum number that we want to have. So here we don't want to go past 0. And then on the array, what you can do is you can say, give me the highest of these two numbers. So if our Y position is 10, you can see here it's going to return 10 for our new position. But then what will happen is if our Y position goes past 0, so let's say it's 20, then what will happen is it'll return 0 here. So it's going to limit our paddle from ever going below 0. So let's try that on the up. So when we're going up, we want the maximum of 0 plus whatever our new Y would be. So here we're going to say Y equals Y take movement speed or 0, whichever one is higher. Let's run that. I'm going to hold up, and beautiful. I'm holding up and you can see it's stopped at the very top. So the next thing to do is to fix it going through the bottom. Now on the bottom, remember the Y position is here. So we want the Y position not going higher than 480 take the height of this. So 480 take this 150. Here we're going to first create a private method which will record the max number here. So we're going to say def max Y, and it's going to be 480. So we can say, rather than hard coding 480, we can say window.height, which should return 480, just because if we ever change it, it's just a bit easier for us there. And so that take and then the height of the paddle. So I'm going to move this into a constant so we can access it like that. And so then we can use it both here and here. So that'll be 480 take 150. My math's not very good. I think it's 330, I guess. And so here now we're going to say the Y is the Y plus our movement speed or the maximum Y, whichever one is smaller. So we're using these min and max on the arrays to achieve that. Let's see how we go. Awesome. I'm holding down, and the great thing now is it's stopping at either end. Cool. So the next thing to do might just be to, for the moment, let's just create an opponent and draw it in. That should be fairly straightforward because we've already got our class. So we simply just need to make a new instance and put it on the right-hand side. So let's say player equals new paddle. We say opponent equals paddle new, and then it's going to be on the right. And we just need to draw our opponent here. So we're going to say opponent move and opponent draw, just like our player. Actually, sorry, the movement won't happen. We're going to have a different mechanism for moving because it's going to automatically follow the ball. Cool. So there's our opponent, there's us. That's all great. The next thing to do is to throw in our ball. For that, we're going to create a new class. And when we initialize it, it's going to have a X and a Y position. It's also going to have an X and a Y velocity. So we're going to say that each frame, each time we draw the ball, it's going to move by a certain amount, and that's what our X and Y velocity will be. So let's say the X is going to be roughly halfway in the screen. So let's say 320, and then the Y will be about halfway, 240. So that's roughly halfway, it's not exact. And then we need to set a velocity, right? So let's say to start off, we'll move the ball, let's say downwards, and then towards the player. So I might actually make it a little bit lower than, so let's say about 400. So the Y velocity is, let's say, negative 1. So each frame it will be dropping 1, and then let's say the X velocity is -1 as well. So Y velocity will be 1, so it's going downwards, and then X velocity will be -1, so it's going left. And we just also need to draw the ball as well, each frame. So let's create a draw method. So our square will have an X and a Y of the values that we've listed there. So the X and the Y will be those. And then we need to set a size. So I think roughly the width of the paddle. So here we're using 25. I think 25 would also be the same. We're going to have to set a color. Let's make it yellow just to differentiate between the paddles a little bit. Normally it'd be the same color in traditional Pong. Now that we've got our ball class, we need to instantiate one of those. So let's say ball equals ball.new. If you wanted to, we could maybe have these as arguments so you could change it. We're only going to need one ball usually. So I think that's fine for the moment. And then each frame, we're going to draw the ball. So let's say ball.draw. Great. So the ball's there. We now need to move at each frame. That's going to consist of us adding these to our our X and Y values. So let's say, we'll say ball.move. Let's make def move. And here we'll set the new X and Y's. So the X will be X plus X velocity, and the Y will be the same, Y equals Y plus Y velocity. So each frame we're going to be changing it by this amount. Cool, okay, great. So that was working fine. You could see the ball slowly moved out of the frame. So a couple of things, the speed, it's probably going to need to be faster. We're going to need to add some modifier to change its speed. And then the other thing is, obviously it wants to bounce off this bottom. So we need to have a check here in the move to see that when the X of it is on the bottom, then we're going to reverse the velocity. So let's do that here. So we're going to make a private method, let's say. And it's going to be called hit the bottom. And we're going to hit the bottom when the, the Y plus the height. So again, I'm going to move this into a constant, so we can use it here. So y plus the height is greater or equal to the window's height. So again, this is 480, but we just want to use this. So if we want to change our dimensions later, it's just a bit easier. So we're going to say move. So we're going to say if hit bottom. So when you hit the bottom, what you want to do is just opposite so change the y velocity to be the opposite. So if we're going down, we're going to change it to be the opposite. Now in Pong, we might want to create a bit more of a complex change in velocity when it hits the bottom based off the speed, the angle. To keep it simple for the moment, we're simply just going to reverse the direction of it in the y-axis. So whatever the velocity was going down, it's going to be the opposite going up. So we're going to say y velocity equals negative y velocity. Okay, let's give that a go. Great. So you can see it's hit the bottom, that's fine. The next thing to do is to make it bounce off of our paddle here. To detect if the ball has run into the paddle, the way we can do that is we're provided with a contains method. So we can say, does this object contain these two coordinates? Now for our case, we kind of want to say, is the paddle and are the ball overlapping? So with the contains, we can only actually do 1 point. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to go the other way around. So we're going to say, does the paddle contain the points of the ball? So if the paddle's on the left-hand side, then we're going to check, we would need to check the top left and the bottom left of the ball. So if either of those 2 points are in the paddle, sorry, then we want to bounce it off. For the opponent as well, we want to check the other 2 sides. So for the opponent paddle, we're going to see, is the top right of the ball and is the bottom right of the ball inside of that? So because it doesn't matter if we check, the other 2 sides for the player, we can actually just check all 4 sides, regardless of if we're checking for the player or the opponent. So essentially our code's going to say, does this paddle contain the top left, the top right, the bottom left, the bottom right of this ball? And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to say here we're going to say, let's say if player dot hit ball, and we're going to need to pass in the ball object. Then we're going to do some sort of logic. So we're going to change the ball velocity. So let's implement this hit ball. That's going to be here on our player. It's going to take in the ball. And so to get the corners of the ball, we've actually got methods x1, x2, x3, x4, and y1 through y4 as well. So starting from the top left, that's x1 and y1 is the top left, x2 and y2 is the top right. The 3 is the bottom right and 4 is the bottom left. So going in a clockwise direction starting from the top left. So we're going to check all of those. So we're going to say hit ball. So let's say, so ball x1, ball y1. So those, and we're going to have 4 of these. Let's say this. So ball 1, x1, y1, x2, y2, x3, y3, x4, y4. So that is that's an array with all of the corners of the ball in x and y values. So we're going to say any of these do coordinates. So this coordinates here, we're given, so for this block of code, we get these coordinates, and the coordinates will represent one of these. So we're saying, do any of these sets of coordinates, do this thing. So this will return true if this block of code, this will return true if any of these return true for this block of code. So our block of code is going to say, we're going to have to draw a rectangle. So here, we're going to say this. So does this rectangle contain coordinates 0, coordinates 1? What I might actually do is, rather than drawing a new rectangle, I might just reuse this one. So after we draw, what we're going to say is shape is this. So I'm going to say shape contains. So simply we're just saying, does our paddle contain these x and y coordinates? And the x and y coordinates, we're going through all of the corners of the ball. So if any of the corners of the ball are in our paddle, then we will hit ball. So what I'll do for the moment is just print out, let's hit in here, and then we'll run it and see if we can get that to register. Ball, okay, sorry, we need, so the XY here will actually be from the shape of the ball. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a similar thing here. We'll assign this object here into shape, and then we just need to make it accessible. So let's say attribute accessor shape, actually attribute reader, we only need to read it. And that will allow us to call shape on our ball, and then from the shape then we can grab the x1 and x. So this will be ball.shape.x1. You can see here the code's getting a bit long, so what we might do is just put this across multiple lines like that. Hopefully that's okay. We'll see if this works now. So I'm getting this error at x1. We're trying to call the method x1 on nil. So that's happening here. What we want to do then is, because on the first frame, we actually do want to check if you've hit the ball before moving everything around. But at that point, the ball's not yet defined. So we're simply just going to make sure our ball.shape is defined. So we'll just say here, ball.shape and the rest of this code. And hopefully that will work. Cool. So now let's have a look at our terminal. When I hit it, beautiful. So you can see here it's printing out that hit. So now the next thing to do is to bounce that ball the other way. And that's simply just going to be reversing the X direction. In the next tutorial, we're going to talk about how to change the angle and the speed of the ball. In traditional Pong, if you hit the ball closer to the end of the paddle, it'll shoot kind of more upwards. And if you hit it in the center, it would kind of return at less of a sharper angle, more of a shallow angle. So for the moment, we're going to do the simplest thing, which is simply to reverse the X direction. But in the next tutorial, we'll come and fix that up and make that a bit nicer. So hit ball, so if we've hit the ball, if the player has hit the ball, then we're going to tell the ball to bounce off of it. So we might just say ball bounce, let's say. Is there a better word? No, bounce is okay. And let's do that. So when the ball bounces, it will simply just change the X velocity. So I'm going to say X velocity equals the opposite X velocity. Okay, let's try that out. Cool. The ball's going a little slowly. What I might do is just get it to speed up a bit. Let's do that now. So the velocity, as we said, is 1 and -1. Let's change it to be, let's say 4. Cool. It's just gone through the top here. Let's make a check to see if it's gone through the top. So here, if we've hit the bottom, do this. Else if hit top. So if hit the top, we're going to do the same thing. So actually we can say, or hit And we'll just do that same thing. So we're always just oppositing the current y velocity if you hit the bottom or if you hit the top. So here, def hit top, it's a bit simpler than the bottom because remember the x and y values are always from the top left. So we can simply just say is y less than or equal to 0. And if it is, then we've hit that top. Missing a question mark. Awesome. Cool. So you can see here that it's bouncing off the, it's not bouncing off the opponent. So let's make that happen next. And that's as simple as this same code here. So we can actually, so because it's the same, we can actually just say if the player's hit the ball or if the opponent has hit the ball. Cool. So yeah, so next thing to do might be get this opponent to start moving. The way we're going to do this is a very, very simple method. So we're going to check the middle of the paddle. So we're going to get so this is the y, remember? So the y plus half of the height. So we'll get this value and we'll check this value against the ball's middle. And if it's different, then we'll slowly just move this each frame towards the ball. Later on, we'll need to make that a bit more complicated just to introduce some more difficulty. But for the moment, that's the simplest thing to do. So let's do that. So we've got play.move and we will say opponent dot, let's say track ball. So it's not going to be the same as this move method, but it's going to automatically move based on the difference between it and the ball. We'll need to give it the ball just so that it can figure that out. So let's make this method on our paddle. So we're going to take in the ball. And so we're going to figure out, first thing we need to figure out is our y value in the middle of the paddle. I'm going to make a new private method for that. So we'll say def, let's say y middle. And that's going to be our y plus half of the shape's height. So shape dot height. Actually, I can just use this. That's good. Y plus height divided by 2. So we just want to divide that height by 2. And then we'll compare that against the ball's y. So we'll say if ball.shape.y, if that's greater than the y middle, and in actual fact, we do need to get the balls. We don't actually want to get the y because the y will be the top of the ball. So again, we've got the same thing. So what I might actually do is rather than using the shape's y, we'll make a new method on our ball, which will just return the middle y. What did I call that here? We'll just name it the same. Y middle, let's call that y middle. And that is going to be our y plus height divided by 2. So this is actually the same method that we've got in our ball plus on here. You can see they're the same. Very good. So now we should be able to call ball dot y middle. So if the ball's y middle is greater than ours, then we're going to need to move ours up. So then we're going to say, and we're going to use this movement speed as well. So we can limit the amount that the opponent can move. And that's going to be some very basic difficulty. If we set it to a low value, the opponent will be quite slow. If we set it to a high value, then they're going to be quite fast. So let's say now our y is plus equals movement speed. Okay. And then we're going to say else if ball less than, So in the case where it's equal, we wouldn't actually want it to move. So if the ball's Y and our paddle's Y are the exact same, well, we don't need to move the opponent at all. So here, let's just say that. And now what we can do is, because we're setting this, we're using this movement speed to to move the opponent, we can now change the difficulty simply just by changing the opponent here. And you can see the opponent's moving. The opponent is actually going out of the screen, you'll notice. So we could fix that by doing the same thing we did to our player. It's not so bad though, because they're not going to go that far. There's going to be a limit based on where the ball is. So we might leave that for the moment, and we'll come back to that in the second session. The last thing to do is just to track when the ball leaves the play, and then we're going to reset the ball. So let's do that. The way we do that is simply just by checking the ball's X value. So if the X value of the ball is lower than 0, or to see if it's gone through the right, we're going to see is the X value of the ball greater than the width. And again, the ball's X value will be from the top left, so we need to add in factor in the width of the ball in that one too. So here we go. We're going to add a new method here. So let's say if ball dot out of bounds. If the ball's out of bounds, then we simply can just create a new ball object, and that's going to start it in the starting spot, and then aim it towards our player. Let's implement this out of bounds on our ball class. Okay, so on the left, we're simply checking if the X value is less than or equal to 0. And for the right, we want to see is the X plus the width greater or equal to the height. So let's just say, we'll create a private method just for that one. Oops. So let's say X. Well, actually, no, we don't need a private method because we can use X2. So remember, we've got X1 through X4, and they correspond to the top left, top right, bottom left. So X2 will actually be the top right, which is the thing we want. So if X is less than or equal to 0, or if our shape's X2 is greater or equal to the window dot width. Okay, let's give that a go. Okay, so I think we might need to slow down our opponent because it's just doing too good of a job. So I'm going to let it go past me, and then you can see the ball resets. So that's all working well. The last thing we're going to do for this session is just to change that opponent, make it a bit slower so that it is actually possible for them to miss the ball. And I'm going to do that, let's say, by lowering their speed. What I might actually do is just change this velocity of the ball, so make it quicker. So that means it's a bit harder for us as well. Right now for the ball, this is kind of hard-coded. We might take in a value so we can easily set that velocity there just with all of the other ones. So let's do that. So we're going to say speed, and this will be here the speed, and this will be negative speed. And that means we can just pass it in here. So let's speed up our ball. So it was 4, let's make it 8. We'll leave us here, and we'll slow down the opponent a little bit. Let's say about 3. Okay, it's now very fast. Cool. Great. Okay, so that's just crashed. Okay, so the reason why it's crashed is when I create a new ball, I need to set that velocity again. So let me just set that here. Let's say ball velocity equals 8, and then I can just change it in one spot there. Okay, that's very quick, by the way. Great, okay. So Yeah, that's awesome. This is actually very quick to play. If you want now, you can start changing the speeds of the player paddle. You can change the speeds of the opponent paddle just to make it harder or easier to your liking. I like it quite quick. I'd probably make the ball a bit quicker even and then make it so that I can move quicker. So I think that's a bit more difficult. You can see obviously the ball just always goes in the same pattern. So we're not going to do that this time, but in the next session, what we're going to do is we're going to change the angle of the ball. It'd be nice as well. I think there's normally a dividing line drawn. So we're going to draw one of those, and then we're going to have scores for each of the players. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. There's a link below to GitHub where you can find all the code for this tutorial and all of the other sessions that I've done. Next week, we're going to be expanding on this game. We're going to be doing some cool things like adding audio. We're going to be changing the angle of the ball when it hits the paddle. So stay tuned for that next week. Take care.